Lesson 53. Our new word for this lesson is the ancient Greek word for doctor. It's iatros, and as you can see, it has a macron over the initial iota, and then another macron over the alpha. Both iota and alpha, both of those are vowels that could be long or short, and so in this particular case, they're marked because they are of long duration. So we want to make sure that those macrons are there. It's not iatros. It's not short like that. It's iatros. So when you pronounce this word, make sure to lengthen the iota, lengthen the alpha, and give them each their own syllable, because iota and alpha do not form a diphthong together.
Right.
That's not a vowel combination that forms a diphthong in Greek. So the iota and alpha each get their own syllable.
Right. And the iota has two different markings because it not only has that macron over it, but also has the smooth breathing. So it's iatros, not hiatros.
Exactly. If it were turned the other way and the bottom of the breathing mark were pointing to the right, then it would be hiatros. And finally, the accent is on the final syllable, what we call the ultima, right?
Right, because it is the final or ultimate syllable.
So it's not iatros
Right.
or iatros, it's iatros.
Yes.
With the accent on the last syllable.
And this brings up a good point that sometimes just because a syllable is long, that does not necessarily mean that it's the accented syllable. Sometimes as English speakers, we tend to want to emphasize or stress whatever syllable is long. So we have a tendency to want to go iatros or iatros, but it's iatros.
So in our mind, we have to separate the concept of accent from the concept of a vowel being a long vowel.
Mm-hmm.
Like the word potato.
Yeah.
In the word potato, that second syllable is long, and it also gets the accent. So it's like potato, potato,
Right.
So we want to combine the accent with, we want to emphasize it not only by giving it more volume, but by lengthening it.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so for English speakers, those two concepts get fused a lot of the time. But in Greek, we have to separate them.
It seems like we almost, at first, need to be sort of mechanical with the pronunciation in order to develop the right habits, So it takes sort of a deliberate effort to say it right. Iatros.
Right. And it's going to feel clunky and clumsy at first, and that's fine. It will flow much more easily after a lot of practice.
Yeah, you have to really practice it like you're, practicing saying a tongue twister or something like that.
Mm-hmm. But this gets into any skill. A lot of times you have to practice what seems to be the very mundane, very elementary principles a lot at first, and then eventually they just become second nature and you don't have to practice them quite so much. But up front, we don't jump into, I'm a knitter, so we don't jump into the super complicated patterns right up front when I'm teaching someone to knit. I'm teaching them the very basic stitches, and those are going to be something that the student is going to have to think about at first. After a while, the hands just move with those basic stitches, and this person can combine those stitches into different patterns and things, and it'll look really cool. But you don't start with the very complicated pattern up front. You have to start with the very basic stitches.
And what you just said reminded me of something, Catherine, that I think that students of ancient Greek should make an effort right from the beginning to say things right with the right vowel lengths, because then that becomes a habit faster than if they start out saying it wrong and then later try to correct themselves.
Yes.
And I think this is actually a point that you brought up before. I have a background in music, and this is a huge thing when it comes to practicing a musical instrument, is you don't start out practicing something on your instrument fast. You practice it extremely slowly to begin with so that you can do it correctly, and then gradually you turn up the speed. You gradually become faster, but without sacrificing correctness.
Mm-hmm.
And as you do that, you build up the skill, and then eventually you build up speed along with it.
I mean, it's in so many fields, in working out, you brought up music, in handicrafts, in running, any type of sport. I mean, how many times do sports teams do those basic drills over and over and over again in order to do them correctly when it's part of a game?
Yes, and anything that requires a certain technique of movement, whether it's music, sports, anything where you're, knitting, anything where you're learning a skill with your, muscles. And this counts as part of that because, the different parts of your mouth really are muscles.
Right.
The lips, the tongue, those are actual physical movements you make when you are pronouncing a word. So what we want to encourage you to do is to make an effort to pronounce the Greek words correctly from the very beginning. And that's going to be a little bit harder now, but it's going to save you tons of work later.
Absolutely.
So if you say iatros, if you say it just like that right from the beginning, you're going to have several benefits. First of all, you're going to, as you say the iota long and the alpha long, you're probably going to remember that those are long because when you say them, they sound long.
Mm-hmm.
The macrons, or the fact that those vowels are long, are reflected in your own pronunciation.
Yep.
And then when you say iatros with the accent on the final syllable, if you physically put the accent on that syllable, you will probably remember that when it's written, it has the accent on that syllable. So there's a knowledge aspect to learning ancient Greek, but there's also a physical skill, a performance aspect where you actually say the words.
Mm-hmm.
And if you say them correctly from the very beginning, it's only going to help you. You're going to remember how the word sounds, how it looks. It's going to help you remember vowel length. It's going to help you remember what syllable has the accent. The list of benefits you get from pronouncing the words correctly and practicing doing it over and over, the list of benefits is just enormous, and it's just going to help you learn the language faster and better.
Exactly.
Before we move on to the exercises, one quick word about the etymology of this word. We have the word pediatrician in English, and as you can see, embedded in the word pediatrician, we have IATR. So that IATR, that comes directly from this ancient Greek word, iatros.
Mm-hmm. Another word is geriatrics, which is the medical field that specializes in treating the elderly, because geron means old, and you can again have iatr, that mid part.
So before we go, Catherine, let's do a few exercises along with our listeners. In number 1, we have Emi iatros. I am a doctor. There's no article in front of the word iatros. It's not ho iatros, the doctor. It's just a doctor. So I am a doctor. What about number 2?
Well, number 2, ho iatrosemi, does have the article, and so it's I am the doctor.
So big difference between 1 and 2. Same thing in 3 and 4. Number 3 does not have the article. Number 4 does have the article in front of the word for farmer, georgos. So number 3, I am a farmer. Number 4, I am the farmer. One more thing, Catherine. In number 5 and number 7, we have a difference. In number 5, it just says, I am Alexander, and there's no article in front of the word Alexandros. But in number 7, there's an article in front of the name Telemachos.
Right. But that does not mean that we translate it as I am the Telemachus. We just leave the article out in our translation. I am Telemachus.
Right, because in ancient Greek, sometimes you'll see the article in front of a name, and sometimes you won't. It just varies.